is going to be our closer, and that's General Olson. If you'd like to come up, and he obviously, I'm sure most of you are familiar with him, but he reports directly to what most of you know is Steve Carell, actually General Saltzman, but I'll turn it over to him.
All right. Well, good morning. And you got the charts, right?
Yes.
Okay,
They should be
awesome.
available.
If we can cue those up, I'll go ahead and open us up. On behalf of the Chief of Space Operations, General Saltzman, and the entire Space Force team, it's a pleasure and honor to be here. This is an exciting time. This is my third year of being engaged with the State of the Space Industrial Base. You know, I applaud DIU and Cassie. You know, been just such a huge part of this, but also I think it's really important to call out Peter Garrettson as our enduring senior editor and leader. He takes all of your inputs, and by the way, that's the richness of this entire effort. This is your direct insert, your voice, and we just amalgamate that, put it together in an efficient way that's really compelling. And I'll tell you, it's the understatement of the year to say that this is a non-traditional report. In many respects, people go, geez, are you really putting your name on that? And the answer is absolutely yes, because it is absolutely a reflection. Last year we had 253 inputs. This year I hope it's in the 400 or 500 range, because this is the way that we get the voice and we make the change at the speed of need that we all want to see. And I think my comments today are going to weave and thread some really key points that all of your previous speakers have made. And so I will be high speed and low drag, but I think it's really important. Last thing before I launch into this is the only change is constant, right? And as we celebrate the extraordinary tenure of Frank DeBello and what he's done here, it's emblematic of this spirit of public-private partnership, of bringing investment, bringing infrastructure to bear on operational outcomes and solutions. And so, as we also see potential changes with General Purdy and others, you know, as they come to the natural ebb and flow of leadership range and shift to new opportunities, this is also about the future. Our best days are ahead of us, not behind us. And I think it's very important that we take the discrete inputs, the discrete discussions that we're going to have here, and drive them into being. So with that, I'd offer you some perspectives on the state of the Space Industrial Base, also SAML, Space Access, Mobility, and Launch, which is a core part of our doctrine in the Space Force. And I am in a flight suit today because this is our work and our utility uniform. We are rolling up our sleeves. We're getting engaged, and I'm also immediately going out to Omaha to Stratcom. I fly on the Airborne Nuclear Command Post. Going to go do that very serious job, but you know that just highlights the interconnectivity of space and all the domains for integrated deterrence and defense. And after all, Bucky said it right, but he missed one. I think you got to have economic, health, and national security completely intertwined, and we'll talk about that. Next slide. So here we are, kicking it off in Florida, the space that is the place that's gonna set the pace for the whole space race. And you know, as we contextually look at it, realtors will say it's location, 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 right? Nothing could be more true, but it's a total team sport. This isn't just one state. This is one amalgam and integrated United States, and we got to bring that to bear along with our partners and coalition allies, because we've seen in Ukraine it ever so clearly the 30+ nations supporting that, plus the strong UN support. This is absolutely the only way to succeed in the modern paradigm. But we'll talk about that a little bit more, because every bit as much as Ukraine is a kinetic war of attrition, it's also a digital war of attrition. But most importantly, I believe it's the first war of cognition, the one that will change all the future ones, because if we look at just space has been the David and Goliath leveler. If we look at it, just a couple companies, and I'm not going to hit them all here, but if you just listen to the words SpaceX, Starlink, Maxar, Capella Space, and ICEYE for communications and data in optical imagery, and then synthetic your radar because there's a lot of clouds and rain and snow formed. And again, that David and Goliath level. And so you better believe we're standing up and enabling, but also taking notes on what to apply for the future. But so too is everyone across the globe. And this means that that times are forever more changed. But this is an opportunity for us because all of you represent that collective opportunity. But we only win with the richness, diversity, strength of our entrepreneurial and innovative and robust ecosystem in the industrial base. If we have unity of command and unity of effort, we got to work together. So taking the big pick, next slide, please. I'm just going to go very quickly. We already talked about it. Space is so vital to our everyday way of life and our economy, but also integrated deterrence. We have to have a stable, secure, safe environment. But we also know that it's contested, congested, competitive, more so than ever. And we have to be the leader in space because that is what it's going to take to have freedom of action and freedom of being. Next slide. I think they're cut off a little bit, but that's okay. You know, we've only been talking, we've been talking about the change. We've survived COVID, all the cyber challenges. We know we got climate, and across that spectrum of conflict, change is the only constant, but we've got lots of challenges on multiple fronts all simultaneously. We talked about Ukraine. We talked about the need to drive reusability and sustainability as we get to ever increasing launch cadences, moving from sub 100 to 400 or so. That's more than one a day out of range here. We got to think differently and disruptively, and yet this is some really important foundational work that will lay the foundation for our connectivity and driving not just for geosynchronous Earth down below. The Space Force area of responsibility is 100 kilometers and beyond. And so I like to say, like Buzz Lightyear, it's to infinity and beyond, and our AOR is constantly expanding along with the universe. But seriously, it is a cislunar and surface side that's also very much so part of our thinking for space domain awareness, and the bottom line is you heard us say it, for our economic health and national security, space is critical. Next slide. But whether it's STEM production, whether it's research work, whether it's dollars in grants, or whether it's proliferation of space capability, it is a definite race in every facet, and it is not a race for flags and footsteps. It is a sustained, enduring one. And yet, we also have some underlying challenges. And I look at that chart down on the right. The SPAC deals got a little frothy, right? And if you look at this data, Q1 2021 kind of was the absolute peak of that. We've seen some consolidation, some retraction, and some challenges. It's one of those that are the underlying factors that are kind of driving where we stand as a nation and as an economy. Next slide. In the space realm, just though looking at the sheer numbers, $366 billion in 2019, now 464, and continuing on in the space side. You open up the lunar economy, you open up the space economy. We're talking multi-trillions in the matter of a decade. And I think General Purdy, Bird Dog, nailed it on the head there. If we look at the potential, we've been spending a huge amount, and rightfully so, on a diverse and rich dynamic ecosystem in the launch space. But if you look at in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, that is the next revolution, and we've got to own that to win it. Next slide. So we'll go very quickly. We still spend a ton of money, but we got to have unity of command and unity of effort to align that against the civil military fusion and command directed set of competitors. Next slide. Similar, every sector, whether it's launch, whether it's injected mass, whether it's small sats, whether it's every single sector, we've seen growth rates like we've never seen before. So this is by necessity driving different ways of thinking. And I think we are enabling those, but there's a lot more we can do. And we're going to talk about authorities, things like indemnification, third-party liability, things like tax incentives, things like a whole host of real tangible, not just word and PowerPoint, platitudes. These are real constructive things that have generated the revolution that we've seen in launch, and we need to extend that to ISAM. Next slide. So it's also exploration. If we look at not just the brilliant success of Artemis 1 and Artemis 2 and 3 coming up on its heels, but it's also a much broader portfolio from a civil commercial perspective. And of course, I think you will see a future where, even though we don't have people in space right now for the Space Force, that's got to be a logical future. That's just a natural evolution. It's a matter of when, not if. As we look at that, though, economic and security have always been tied. This has been the history of our nation. If we look, if we look at the Guard and the Coast Guard, they've existed from even between and before the time of our nation's origins. And so it's always been that way. We've always need to protect those sea lines of commerce and communications, those economic lines in the settling of the new territories. Next slide. So that's all context. Why do we exist as a Space Force? Well, we're out of our terrible twos. This is year 3, and it's about implementing. It's no longer about establishing and growing. It is now about implementing and starting to run, all focused on one thing, and that's to protect U.S. and allied interests in space. Simply put, that is a big mission, given that we already established it's critical to our economic health and national security, and it's already a part of everything that we do. Next slide. So, it is no longer a benign environment. Hasn't been so for quite a long time, perhaps 10 plus years. We only really been talking about that, though, for 2.5 or so. And as we look at the number of threats, kinetic, non-kinetic, physical, digital, offensive and defensive challenges, it is congested, contested, and competitive. But, the Chief of Space Operations, my boss, General Saltzman, has had some extraordinary talks both at Congress, at the Space Symposium, and AFA, and really we have 3 lines of effort. And what I'm going to drum on or emphasize is the third one. First, we got to provide, number one, resilient and effective combat-ready forces, combat-capable space forces. And I don't like the fact that that's a necessity. We really want to drive towards integrated deterrence, because we know that following the space environment is no good for anyone in that freedom of action and freedom to maneuver in space. But we have to have the capabilities to protect and defend our U.S. allies' interests in space. Now, the second line of effort is amplifying our guardian ideal and guardian spirit, and that is courage, character, commitment, and connection. Those 4 elements are what comprise this guardian ideal, but it's most about people. But the third one is partner to win, and that's exactly what today's about, and that's why I'm here. It's partnering with industry, partnering across the interagency, partnering with like-minded international allies and partners and coalition members, and it is doing so with academia. It is doing so across the board in a smart and informed way. That is how we're getting after it with these 3 lines of effort. Next slide. So it is doctrinally focused on preserving that freedom of action and maneuver in space, enabling the lethality and the joint level with an effective and resilient architecture. And finally, it's given us independent options that, whether we can be supported or supporting, I don't think much like the past has been driven by strategic airlift and mobility and air superiority. The same is absolutely true times 10 for space. Next slide. And, building on General Purdy, he nailed it. If we look at our doctrine, our Space Corps doctrine, I wanted to emphasize that what we're doing here, what we're talking, is at the core, the heart of our fundamental underpinnings as a service. We're establishing these and growing these, as I mentioned, in year 3. But space mobility and logistics, or you add the A in there, space access, mobility, and launch or logistics, as SAML is a core part of what we do. And there's this old saying that rookies deal with tactics and masters deal with logistics. Nothing could be more true. Next slide. We'll build on it. We do it with partners. We already talked about those host and range, but this is a total team sport, and you better believe we're absolutely serious about doing that. That is why I have been, and this will probably be my 3rd and final year of doing this state of the space industrial base report. This is the core of how we will win, because our Honorable Calvelli, our Service Acquisition Executive for Space, he has laid out some new principles about getting 2 to 3 years, much swifter, sooner deliveries, much simpler and smaller capabilities, but to leverage the tech innovation and refresh. But our overall acquisition mantra is, hey, we're going to exploit what we've got. We're going to buy everything that we can as services and only build what we must. And I think that is being driven in across the board, whether it's the Space Systems Command, the Space Development Agency, whether it's the Defense Innovation Unit, space side, whether it's the Space Rapid Capabilities Office, the Department of the Air Force Rapid Capabilities Office, or any other element. And that is the way and the truth. Next slide. So as we look at that, we're also driving it in a campaign approach, a regular cadence. You've heard perhaps about this competitive endurance. That is because we prefer to compete rather than get into the crisis and the conflict sides of the continuum. But it is the focus of how we're investing both. And speaking of investments, this year, the president's budget request for the Space Force White World is $30 billion. That's up $2.6 billion from last year. And that's a doubling from just 2 years ago. That is a fundamental recognition that this is that critical to the nation. And as we look at that, that's extraordinary. Overall, DAF-wide, we're at $215.1 billion president's budget request. This is a significant amount of money. When you overlay the operational imperatives, the 7 operational imperatives, of which space is OI1, a resilient and effective space order of battle, that is what we're driving towards as fundamentally important. First and foremost, it's left to boom. It is sustained throughout any kind of conflict, and it's also what's going to help us get out of that conflict and restore peace and stability. But it's putting resources smartly at the speed of need, and in so doing, just this past year, I'm really tickled. I got to be an integral part of both our Space Force and our DoD. The White House released the first U.S. national policy on in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, or ISAM. Both a policy and an implementation plan that has metrics, that has lead agencies, that has a steady cadence of accountability. And I think that's really where the magic is going to happen, is in those implementation plans. So this is showing you we've got the foundational policy, we've got the foundational doctrine underpins. Now it's time to crank. Next slide. And speaking of space mobility, in, from, to, and through space, that is where the future. Space logistics elevates all of our game. It expands the capabilities for the nation, and it also enhances our sustainment in that competitive endurance that General Saltzman talks about. That's how we get it done. Next slide. And no longer, we are out of the era of expendable whole systems. We simply can't afford it. We don't have enough resourcing, and it's much better to drive towards reusability, ultimately full reusability, and I think serviceability is a critical part of that. Next slide. You've seen it in the economy. This is too much of an eye chart in here, but all these sectors have seen tremendous growth. Traditional, non-traditional, small, medium, large. This is a right market, and we're excited about it. Next slide. And so finally, I think as we look at space mobility and logistics, right there in the center, sustained space maneuver. That is what Lieutenant General Shaw gave what I would call a seminal briefing on. That was the topic at the Space Symposium, Space Warfighter Luncheon, and he's absolutely right. He and I have been championing this. We really don't like the term maneuver without regret. I think that implies that you have some psychological challenges with that. We think this is absolutely fundamental to every domain, as we've already seen, and it needs to be a fundamental part of space. So we're driving that home, but there's so many other elements that are enabled and explosively ripe for growth in a positive way. Next slide. So kind of wrapping it up, space is this catalyst, not only for prosperity, but you also got to protect. Those two go hand in hand. We think there's lots of opportunities there, and it does extend well out beyond. And I'd like to say, we have, some who believe in a blue water and a brown water Navy, but both littoral projection and then global soft power and influence and protection of sea lines of commerce and communication. I believe so too do we need a blue water and a brown water space force. Brown water is geo and below, and the blue water is cislunar, lunar and beyond. And I think those absolutely have to be evolved. Certainly the near-term priority, the acute priority, where we are focused with the majority of our budget is, you know, if we look at the surface of the moon, the last 3 objects to be placed on the surface of the moon, none of them were from the United States. Number one, you know, the third oldest is the Soviet Union's Lunokhod. The next is China's Chang'e 4 and Chang'e 5. And right now, their orbiter is in the near rectilinear halo orbit. To say that that's far out is absolutely emphatically wrong. So we need to be prepared, and we need to look at that, and we are. Next slide. So bringing it together, you know, I have a tradition of doing the state of the space scorecard. It is about Ignite's American launches in aggregate. But, you know, this year there's a lot more yellow than there was last year. This is my personal opinion, leveraging my unique vantage point as the mobilization assistant or the guy with industry and other experience for the chief of space operations. I think, you know, if we highlight, you know, there's continued growth as we've seen, as we look at innovation, technology, and the entrepreneurship side. We've got a rich ecosystem there, but we got some significant challenges. You know, the investment, we've seen some retraction and retrenchment there. National priorities, we've been continually talking about a North Star to unify it and bring it all together. From a strategy side, I think we do have some great strategy evolving, but it's not yet all stitched together in a cohesive, robust way. Again, we talked about unity of command and unity of effort. I don't think we're there yet, but this is your and our opportunity to drive that. As we look at the atmospherics, the markets, the executive leadership, the risk posture, both tactically and strategically, the incentive structure, cyber, you know, the only thing I think we can say there is the alliances, particularly highlighted by Ukraine and by all the tremendous work we stood up with Indo-PACOM. We've got Korea, we've got UCOM, now with Space Force components stood up there. As we look at all that ecosystem, that's the only green one there. I think that's where we really need to be working in earnest as well. Over here, so there's you know, from an accessibility perspective, you heard General Purdy. I think we've got a pretty good trajectory there, but you can take nothing for granted. Got a lot of competition, but there's also been some consolidation and some challenges there. The rest all need some work. So my overall commentary would be is I think we're strategically poised for smart action and tactically building. Now, what is smart? That's being strategic. It's being multifaceted. That means aggressive. That means robust and resilient. And it means getting after it in a timely fashion. That's what I mean by smart action at the strategic level. And so with that, the final slide, I really appreciate the opportunity to kick this off, drill everything together, weave those elements throughout, and I just would charge you with actively engaging and bringing your thoughts, your ideas in a constructive way, in a clear and compelling, actionable way into this and the other state of space industrial base activities that we're doing. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.